Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhi Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tato Jayamudirayet. Om. Welcome back. We have come to the final installment of our Vyadha Gita. Just as the Bhagavad Gita is an excerpt which is studied independently, in the same way the Vyadha Gita is also an excerpt, not that often studied independently, but it is a section of Vedantic teachings which can be excerpted from the Mahabharata for the sake of study. It began on chapter 197 in the Vyadha Parva, which means it goes for a total of 10 chapters. Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapters. Vyadha Gita, 10 chapters. We come to the final 2 chapters today. First, we're going to see, in fact, you'll enjoy today the story of how Vyadha got cursed. So we remember it began with the story of the Brahmana. The Brahmana who had that, remember the bird in the tree? You remember that story. Excuse me. So, the Vyadha Gita opened with that story. Now we're closing with another story. The story of how Vyadha, the butcher, how the butcher got cursed. He was originally a Brahmana, and he was cursed to be born as a Shudra and to become a butcher. We'll see that story in just a few moments. That comprises chapter 205, and then chapter 206 is the concluding chapter, and we find his final teachings, his concluding Upadesha, which is really quite moving, I think. I think you'll enjoy. So let us pick up the thread. Brahmano vacha, Brahmano vacha, yena karma vipakena, yena karma vipakena, prapteyam shudrata tvaya, prapteyam shudrata, ta etadachami vijñatum, etadachami tatve nahi mahamate, tatve nahi mata. So our Brahmana has been patiently listening through quite an extensive discourse given by the butcher. Remember that the Brahmana had a problem with pride and anger, and he was sent to meet this Vyadha, this butcher. And this butcher has been giving him a brilliant discourse. Now, towards the end of the discourse, the Brahmana has a question. And the question is, Yena, because of what? Karma vipakena, because of the fructification of what kind of karma? What kind of karma do you have? Tvaya shudrata prapta iyam. Iyam shudrata, the status of being a shudra. The status of being a shudra. Tvaya prapta, which is attained by you, which you attained means you're stuck with it. So how, and to paraphrase that, simply he was asking, how did you happen to become a Shudra? Due to what karma? Remember that we consider the circumstances of birth to be determined by your Purva karma, by the actions that you've committed in past lives. And certainly at his time and place, to be born a Shudra was undesirable. In modern times, it's less of an issue, thank goodness. But in his time, it was socially limiting. It had certain limitations associated with it. So therefore it was considered a highly undesirable condition of birth. Yet he was born into this family of Shudras. So the question the Brahmana asks, and the Brahmana is especially confused because this Vyadha is endowed with such tremendous wisdom, it seems so unlikely that he would be born into the Shudra family, yet he was. So he asks, due to what karmas? What kind of terrible deeds have you committed in a past life, because of which you were born as a Shudra? Etad ichhami vijñātum. Etad, this, vijñātum. To know this, ichhami, I want to know. I want to know how you, due to what karmas were you born as a Shudra. I want to know this tatvena, as it truly is. Mahamate, O wise one, O Vyadha, please tell me truly. And the Vyadha replies, Vyadho vacha, Vyadho, aham hi brahmana purvam, aham hi brahmana, asam dvijavaratmaja, asam dvijavarat. Vedadhyayi sukushalo, Vedadhyayi sukush, Vedanganam chaparagaha, Vedanganam. So the Vyadha replies, Purvam, previously, which means in my past life, Aham hi Brahmanaha. Indeed, I was a Brahmana. Well, the first question we have to ask is, how does he know? Well, it's said in many scriptures that some who are, not all, some who are enlightened know. Not everyone. Every enlightened person doesn't necessarily know. There's no rule that says that an enlightened person should have that special siddhi, that power, that capacity to know what happened in their prior life. An enlightened person may or may not have that capacity. Apparently, our Vyadha does. He knows what was his past life, and he says, he indeed, aham brahmanaha. I was a brahmana in my asam. I was a brahmana in my past life. Dvija varatmaja is a term of respect for that Brahmana. Oh, the one who is born in the best of Brahmana families. He addresses the Brahmana. He says, in his prior life, he was not only a Brahmana, but he was a Veda Adhyayi. He was a reciter of the Vedas. Vedic recitation was part of his usual activity. And he was Sukushalaha. He was very skillful in reciting the Vedas. Remember, in those days, they used to memorize one or more Vedas in entirety. To memorize the entire Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, etc. Depending on the family you were born into, some of you know the family names. If you were born into a Dvivedi family, your tradition was to memorize two Vedas. Trivedi, 3 Vedas. Chaturvedi, your tradition was to memorize all 4 Vedas. I'm not sure how many Chaturvedis nowadays know all the Vedas, but anyway, common family names, most of you know. So he had memorized his family's Veda. He was very skillful in chanting that Veda. Not only in chanting the Veda, but also Veda Anganam cha paragaha. Paragaha. Paragaha means one who is thoroughly well-versed, one who has understood it thoroughly. One who has understood thoroughly not only his Vedas, but Veda Anga, all the auxiliary texts associated with the Vedas. There are 6 different auxiliary texts associated with the Vedas. He learned them all very thoroughly. And now comes the story. The story will go fairly quickly, because it's story. But a nice story, though. Kaschid, interesting story. Kaschid Raja Mama Sakha, Kaschid Raja Mama Sakha, Dhanur Veda Parayanaha, Dhanur Veda Para, Samsarga Dhanushi Sreshtas, Samsarga Dhanushi Sre, Tato Hamabhavam Dvaja, Tato Hamabhavam. He's talking about Purvam, his prior life. In his prior life, Mama Sakha, my friend, he had a friend. Who was his friend? Kaschit Raja. There was some king. There was a king who was his friend in the prior life, and the king was Dhanurveda Parayanaha, skillful in Dhanurveda. Dhanurveda is the scripture of archery. So we presume that the king was not only skillful in the scripture of archery, but he was a skillful archer. In the use of bow and arrow, the king was very skillful. Samsargat, due to his relationship with the king, due to Vyadha in a prior life as a Brahmana. So he was a Brahmana. Remember, prior life he was a Brahmana. He was probably part of the king's retinue. And Samsargat, due to his relationship with the king, he says, Aham abhavam tataha. Tataha, as a result, Samsargat, of his relationship with the king. Aham abhavam, I became, Dhanushi Sreshtaha. I became the best in archery. I became the best in the use of bow and arrow. Who is saying this? The Brahmana. How did he become the best in archery? Because of his friend. Who was a friend? The king, who was very learned in Dhanurveda. Then the story continues. He tasmin eva kale tu, he tasmin eva ka, mrigayam nirgato nripaha, mrigayam nirgato, tato bhyahan mrigans tatra, tato bhyahan mrigans tat, subahu nashramam prati, subahu nashramam. Etasmin eva kale, at that time, when he was a Brahmana in the court of the king, what happened then? Nripaha, the king, nirgataha, had gone out from the palace. Had gone out from the palace for what reason? Mrigayam, for the sake of hunting. The king had gone out for the palace to hunt, and obviously had taken the Brahmana friend along, because they were samsargat, due to their relationship. Tataha, then, at that time, the king, abhyahan, he killed mrigan, deer. How many? Subahun, many deer. The king killed many deer. Tatra, there. Now that happens to be very significant. Tatra, there. Where? So they went out for hunting. Fine, big forest is around the palace, but where exactly did they go out for hunting? Ashramam prati, in front of an ashrama, in the hermitage of a sage. So they went out not just merely into the forest in general, but to a particular portion of the forest where there was the ashrama of a sage, the hermitage of a sage, and this is introducing what happened next. Atakshipta sharo ghoro, atakshipta sharo gho, mayapi dvaja sattama, mayapi dvaja sat, taritas chamunis tena, taritas chamunis tena, sharena tata, Sharena nata parvana, Sharena nata parvana. Ata, then, Maya, api in the second line. Dvaja Sattama, O great Brahmana. The Vyadha is talking to the Brahmana. And by the way, where is this dialogue taking place? Do you remember? It's taking place in his butcher shop. in the presence of dead animals. Very unlikely setting for this important dialogue to take place. Dvaja Sattama, O Brahmana, Maya Api. So he says, when in my prior birth, when I had gone out with the king hunting, the king had killed many deer in front of that ashrama. He says, Maya Api, by me also, Kshiptaha, Sharaha, Ghoraha. Sharaha, an arrow. Ghoraha, a terrible arrow. Kshiptaha was fired, was shot. Maya Api, by me. So he said not only the king was shooting all the arrows and killed so many deers, but here he says, I also shot an arrow. And the language is in a singular number. So the king shot many arrows and shot many deer, but this, the Vyadha, in a prior life, apparently shot only one. If he shot many, he would have said, I shot many. He shot only one. But it was a very fateful arrow. The king, having shot and killed many deer, this Vyadha in his prior life, he shot only one arrow. And as a result of that terrible arrow, Tena, because of Tena Sharena, because of that arrow, what kind of arrow? Anata Parvana. Yeah. The language is a little odd. Parva refers to, arrows are made of bamboo, right? And the bamboo has parvas. Parva means joint. So there are joints in the arrow, and at the joint of an arrow, the arrow might be crooked at the joint, but he says, anatta parvana, by arrows whose joints were not crooked, which is a very complicated way of saying the arrows were straight. That's all he means. But such a complicated expression he uses, anatta parvana sharena, by arrows whose joints were not crooked. Anyway, so with his sharp, straight arrow, by the one and only arrow shot by the Vyadha in his prior life, Tena, due to that, Munihi Taditaha. You can guess the meaning of that. Muni, a sage. The sage who lived at that ashrama, at that hermitage. What happened to that sage? Taditaha. He was stricken down, Tena Sharena, by that straight, sharp arrow, by the only arrow. What fate! The king is shooting arrow after arrow, and he's getting one deer after another. And you can imagine the Vyadha says, let me try one. So he takes one arrow and shoots it, and what happens? Terrible. And look at the consequence of that. Where am I here? What is the consequence? Next page. So he says, Bhumau nipatito brahman, Bhumau nipatito, Uvacha pratinadayan, Uvacha pratinadayan, Naparadhyam yaham kinchata, Naparadhyam aham kena papamidam kritam, Kena papamidam. Brahman, the Vyadha's address, back in the butcher shop, the Vyadha is addressing the Brahmana. He says, Bhumau, to the ground, Nipatitaha, he fell. The Muni fell, being stricken by his arrow. The Muni, the sage, fell to the ground, pratinadayan, screaming, crying out. So the Muni, the sage, fell to the ground, crying out. And what did the Muni say? Uvacha. The Muni said, the sage said, last line, Kena papam idam kritam. Obviously, idam papam, this sinful act, kritam, which has been done, it's been done kena, by whom? by whom has this sinful act been done, this act of shooting the sage with an arrow. And next, the line I skipped over is really significant. He says, the sage laying on the ground with an arrow sticking out of him. What does the arrow say? What does the arrow say? Arrows don't say anything as far as I know. What did the sage say? Na aparadhyami aham kinchata. In no way whatsoever, aham aparadhi. In no way whatsoever am I aparadhi, guilty of sin. In no way am I guilty of sin. Now you have to get inside the sage's mind to understand. The sage, being a student of Vedanta and a student of the whole tradition, understands that whatever happens to us in life is due to the unfoldment of karma. So if something really terrible happens to you, it must be due to the unfoldment of some really terrible act that you have committed. Some terrible, sinful, harmful act that you have committed can result in your undergoing terrible suffering in this life. So the sage is laying on the ground, stricken with an arrow, and he wonders, what terrible act did I commit because of which I should be stricken by an arrow? Now this is a really significant argument. We've talked about the doctrine of karma from time to time in this class, and he's pointing to one of the most difficult and challenging teachings of the doctrine of karma. And that is, if he has been struck by that arrow, which is terrible, it must be the result of his own terrible karma in this life or a prior life. But here's the problem. First of all, he's a sage. Has he committed any terrible act in this life? No. Then, what about prior lives? There's an assumption we can make. What is the assumption? Had he committed terrible deeds in prior lives, do you think he would be born in such a way that he'd come up as a great sage? We don't know, but it's unlikely. So there's no guarantee. As we've commented many times, the doctrine of karma is not a precise mathematical doctrine that we can figure out exactly this and that and the other thing. But we can make this general observation that if he's become a great sage, we can probably presume that not only has he not done any terrible deeds in this life, but he probably hasn't done any terrible deeds in prior lives either, else he would not have arisen to the status of being a great sage. So then, how do we explain him being stricken by the arrow? He himself cries out and says, Nakinchit, in no way whatsoever, aparadhi aham, in no way am I one who has committed a past deed that deserves this kind of unfoldment of karma in this life. This is his observation. To paraphrase that very simply, he says, I don't deserve this. Which is correct. Yet it happens. So how do we explain this according to the doctrine of karma? He didn't deserve it, yet it happened. And it cannot be a violation of the doctrine of karma. We have to explain it within the doctrine of karma. And it turns out that there's a connection in answering the question. There's a connection to the calendar, which is significant. Tomorrow happens to be the 15th anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. As you know very well, 3,000 people died. And we discussed it at that time, and we're going to discuss it briefly again. 3,000 people in the World Trade Center, they all died. Was it their karma to die? Now, you could argue that there are 3,000 people working, and a lot of them were, if you want to be really kind of not sarcastic, but kind of nasty-minded, you could say, oh, they're all stockbrokers and financial people, they're all crooked, and and they got what they deserved. That's ridiculous. No one would ever dream of saying such a thing. So then we have to say they also didn't deserve, based on their deeds, they didn't deserve to die. How do we explain 3,000 people? Could they all have had the same karma? By the way, something to bear in mind is it is taught that the length of your life is determined by the karmas with which you're born. Specifically, the number of breaths, this is how they teach it, the number of breaths you will breathe in this life was determined by your karmas when you were born. Which explains why yogis practice pranayama. They slow their breathing. They get a few extra years of life. That's a joke. Don't take that seriously. Okay. But what are the chances that all 3,000 of those innocent people had their last breath determined to be that fateful day 15 years ago? It's so terribly unlikely. So according to the doctrine of karma, it becomes very difficult to explain in terms of their karma, in terms of the karma accumulated in past lives by those 3,000 people. It is virtually impossible. It's so terribly unlikely that they were all fated to die by their karma on that day. So then how do we explain that? Well, the doctrine of karma deals with more than your accumulated results of actions from past lives. The doctrine of karma includes actions committed in this life as well. And we've had this discussion, a very important discussion. And the discussion goes like this. Right now, you have the capacity to commit new karmas. In addition to the results of all your past karmas, which we call prarabdha karma, the karmas, the results from your past actions, which are fructifying in this life, we call prarabdha karmas. But then we also have a category called agami, or kriyamana karma, which are the newly committed karmas you do in this life. So we're talking about two different kinds of karma. One is the karmas from past lives, and the other is the karmas newly committed in this life. And please note that you have free will. We had this discussion about half a year ago, long discussion on free will. If you didn't have free will, you can't commit a karma. Only a deed done intentionally is a deed born of free will. So, is a deed that incurs karma. So here we go. Regardless of karmas done in past lives, right now, you have the free will to commit new karmas. You have the free will to commit new karmas. Those 3,000 people who died had the free will to commit new karmas. And the hijackers of those planes also had the free will to commit new karmas. Puja Swami Dayananda, my guru, explained it with these words. He said, the loss of those 3,000 people was not due to their karmas at all. The loss of those 3,000 people was due to the, and his exact words, due to the abuse of free will on the part of the terrorists. The terrorists have free will. The terrorists can commit new karmas. And when the terrorists abuse their gift of free will and commit this act of terror, what are the consequences? Sadly, the consequence was the loss of 3,000 lives. So the point Puja Swamiji was making was everything that happens to you is not due to your past karmas. You know this very well. We've discussed this at great length. Whatever happens to you is a combination of past karmas and current karmas. Past karmas you understand. Current karmas also, right? If you do good actions today, those good actions can still affect you in this life, in addition to the next life. If you do bad actions today, those harmful actions will affect you in this life and the next life. And it turns out it's not only your actions that count, but the actions of others also affect us. That's so obvious. See, just to make it very, very clear, the actions of your family members, do they affect you? Sometimes it helps you a lot, and sometimes it creates real headaches. But it's true that wherever there are other people, wherever there's a relationship, you can be affected by those other people. You're affected by the people in your family. When you get into a car, you're affected by other drivers. And sadly, you can even lose your life due to the behavior of another driver. If someone loses their life due to the behavior of another driver, is it due, the person who dies, is it due to their karma, or is it due to the bad driving of the other fellow? The honest answer is we don't know, because we have no precise way of looking at this. But if we assume that the person who died had karma to live a long, productive life, if we make that assumption, we're led to the conclusion that the bad driving on the part of the other driver caused this loss of life. So going back now to our central example, as Puja Swamiji explained, the abuse of free will can override your karma. You might have the karma to live to 98 years old. By the way, it's a side issue. Is living to 98 years old, is that because of punya karma or papa karma? Don't make any hasty assumptions. It's not necessarily a good thing to live to be 98. It can be you know this, it can be pretty tough to live a long life. So don't assume. But suppose you do have the karma to live to be 98 years old. Somebody, through the abuse of free will, could cut your life short. That's how Puja Swamiji explained that terrible act 15 years ago. And that's how we can interpret this act. Which is to say, it was definitely not due to the sage's karma, the Muni's karma, that he suffered being struck by that arrow. But it was due to the abuse of free will on the part of the Vyadha in his prior life. In prior life, he was a Brahmana going out with the king for sport to shoot some arrows. He intentionally fired that arrow. That was a deliberate act. So we could say that it was an abuse of free will. So this is suggested by the sage's words. He says, "Na aparadhi aham." I am not deserving of this. I am not a sinner. I am not one who deserves this kind of karma. He's right. Of course, he's a sage. Sages are always right. So he's making a statement of fact. He says, I am not one, nakinchit, in any way. I am not one who would deserve such an act. So he recognizes that he's been shot with an arrow, not due to his karma, but due to the abuse of the free will on the part of the Vyadha. And he couldn't see the Vyadha yet, so he says, Kena papamidam kritam, who did this terrible, sinful act? And the Vyadha probably rushes up to him and says, Ajanata kritam idam, wrong meter. Ajanata kritam idam, ajanata kritam, mayet yatatam abruvam, mayet yatataram, kshantum arhasi me brahman, kshantum arhasi me iti chokto maya munihi, iti chokto maya munihi. So he says to the sage, Ajanata kritam idam maya. He says, idam kritam, this was done, maya. They say that maya, mayet yata, 3 words, maya, iti, ata. Maya, iti, ata. So, idam kritam, this was done, maya, by me. He's not going to lie. This terrible act of striking you with the arrow, this was done by me, ajanata, without knowing. Without knowing means I didn't see that you weren't a deer. So without knowing that it was you, this was done by me. Tam abruvam, I said to him, I said to the sage. By the way, there's another interpretation. Can we? The doctrine of karma is so complex. It allows for multiple interpretations. We've given you one interpretation. That is, done due to the abuse of free will. In the case of 9/11, I think that is the only legitimate explanation. In this case, there are multiple possible explanations. And here's another explanation. Did some of you pick up on another possibility? Hinted by the word ajanata, without knowing. This was done by me, he says, ajanata, without knowing, or simply accidentally. This was done by me accidentally. Now, you might remember when we discussed the doctrine of karma in quite some depth, over half a year ago, as part of our study of Mahabharata. If you remember at that time, we had a lengthy discussion, and I mentioned it just before, a lengthy discussion about how karmas are only deeds done intentionally. An act done non-intentionally is not a karma in the scriptural sense of the word. And you heard me give the example. You'll remember in a moment if I give you the example. If you smash a bug, that's a small papa karma. But if you're walking down the sidewalk and you step on a bug without even seeing it, we cannot call that a karma. In the case of smashing the bug, you deliberately and unnecessarily took the life of a living thing. For that reason, there will be a papa karma, not a big papa karma, it's just a small bug. So there'll be a small papa karma associated with that. But when you stepped on the bug accidentally outside, we cannot attribute that action to you. In fact, the way we would understand it is, it was the bug's karma to die underneath your foot. Which is to say that the number of breaths, do bugs breathe? I don't know. I don't think they have lungs like us, but anyway, the karmically determined lifespan of the bug ran out at the time you stepped on it. And that is a legitimate explanation, because an act done by you unintentionally is not a new karma, but rather is due to the unfoldment of somebody else's karma. Let's go back to the automobile accident. That example I gave also has two options. If somebody dies in an automobile accident, there are two possibilities. One is it's possible the other driver was willfully negligent. For example, if you choose to drink and drive, you are being willfully negligent, and therefore it's an abuse of free will. And if somebody dies as a result of somebody else's willful negligence, whoever was willfully negligent committed an act in which it was the abuse of free will which killed a person, we won't call that an accident. They did it deliberately. They deliberately filled their bodies with alcohol and then went out driving. That's not an accident. That is willful. That's deliberate. On the other hand, there are many traffic accidents which are, we use the word accident. If it's truly accidental, and it happens. I mean, most people have had an accident sometimes. If you're driving carefully, things still happen. I mean, they're just, sometimes something just happens, and you didn't see something, or just something odd happened, and things indeed happen accidentally. If it was truly an accident through which this person died in the automobile accident, we then assume that it was the right time for that person to go. We have to assume. If it was truly an accident, if no one committed a willful act, and yet someone died, then just as the bug was destined by its karma to have its life end at that time, in the same way, somebody who dies in an automobile accident, if it's truly, genuinely an accident, if there's no inattentiveness, if there's no willful negligence, then we might assume that it was that person's karmically determined point in life at which they would die. None of this can we prove mathematically, but based on the doctrine of karma, these are reasonable assumptions. Now, coming back to our story. First possible explanation was abuse of free will on the part of the Vyadha in his prior life. Now, what is the second possibility? The second possibility is, he says, ajanata itam kritam maya. This was done accidentally by me. If it truly was an accident, it's not really a karma. And if it is not due to the karma, the act, the deed of the Vyadha, then how do we explain the munis being struck by that arrow? Then it must be the muni's karma. Now if you say, but he lived a good life in this life, okay, maybe prior life, But in a prior life too, he must have lived a pretty good life in order to be born in such a situation where he could be a sage in this life. Okay, go back several hundred lives. You go back far enough, without doubt you can find some harmful deed that could fructify in his being struck by an arrow. Anyway, we've taken this opportunity, because it's story, so in it we need something more than story for today's class. So we've taken this opportunity to explore this situation through the lens of karma, and we have two alternate explanations for how and why it happened, and we don't know which explanation is true. We don't have the ability to see, to understand. It's not science. It's not something that we can observe. Okay, so here we have these two explanations. Then, tam abruvan, I told him that it was done as an accident. Kshantum arhasi me Brahman, Brahman, O great sage, O Brahmana, me kshantum arhasi, you should forgive me. Please forgive me. Iti choktaha maya munihi. Now, the first three lines are the Vyadha in his prior life talking to the sage. The last line is the Vyadha talking to the Brahmana in the butcher shop. So we shift context very quickly, and he says, thus, iti, thus, munihi uktaha, thus the sage was addressed maya, by me. Thus I said to the sage. Then the story continues. Tata pratyabravid vakyam, tata pratyabravid. There's a typo here. Should be a r, as in urashi. Urashir mam krodha murchitaha. Urashir mam krodha Vyadhastvam bhavita krura, Vyadhastvam bhavita Shudra yonaviti dvaja, Shuna yodraviti. Tataha, thereafter, Urishihi, in the second line, the Urishihi, who was Krodha murchitaha, who was overcome with anger. Vrishi, he had been struck by the arrow. He's laying on the ground, struck by the arrow. The Vyadha has just apologized. He says, please forgive me. Do you think the Rishi is just going to... If you've been struck by an arrow, and somebody says, please forgive me, you say, okay. Doesn't work like that. So Rishi, who was krodha murchitaha, who was overcome with anger, pratyabravit, he replied. He said, vakyam, this statement, mam, to me. That Rishi, who was overcome with anger, he said this to me. What did he say? Last two lines. He addressed the Rishi laying on the ground with an arrow sticking out of him. He addresses the Vyadha as krura, O cruel one. O cruel one, Vyadha tvam bhavita. Tvam, you, bhavita, will become Vyadha. You will become a butcher. We had some discussion. Vyadha could mean hunter. Vyadha could mean butcher. Vyadha could mean both. Someone who hunts and sells the meat. We've been taking it in the context of butcher. He says, Krura, O cruel one, you will become a butcher or hunter in your next life, and you will be born Shudra Yonao, in the yoni, in the womb of a Shudra. You will be born into a Shudra family. We explained before that in the ancient times, the profession of being a butcher was done by those of the Shudra caste at that time. By the way, that's why we differentiated hunter versus butcher, right? Hunters are usually kshatriyas, as in the case of the king. The king was a kshatriya, therefore he's out hunting. But butchers are not hunter. Here, butcher, because he was born into a Shudra family. Born into a Shudra family suggests he probably wasn't a hunter, but he was a butcher. So you will be born as a Vyadha in a butcher, Shudra Yonishu, born to a family of Shudras. Iti. Thus, he said, Dvija. This is something looks odd because there are two terms of address. First, he says Krura, O cruel one. And then in the second line, he says Dvija, O twice born. Very unusual to see these two expressions in the same sentence. Remember, in his prior life, he was a Dvija. He was a twice born, he was a Brahmana in his prior life. So Dvija, O Brahmana, Krura, O cruel one, you will be born in your next life as a butcher into a family of Shudras. And then, by the way, that ends chapter 205, and we'll just see the beginning of chapter 206 now. Ashramam cha maya nito, ashramam cha maya, na cha pranarvya yujyata, na cha pranarvya yud, etatte sarvam akyatam, etatte sarvam, yatha mama pura bhavata, yatha mama pura bhavata. Ashramam cha maya nitaha. So the Muni was nitaha, led, maya, by me, Vyadha in his prior life. He says maya nitaha, the sage was taken by me, where? Ashramam, back to his ashrama, back to his hermitage. He says, I took that sage who had been stricken by the arrow, I took him back to his ashram, back home, as we would say, and nacha pranaihi vyayujyata. He was not, again, the language is really like that Nata Parvana arrow. This is also some peculiar language. Na pranaihi vyayujyata. He was not separated from his life. That's what it says. Na prayujyata, he was not separated, pranaihi, from his life. Means what? He didn't die. He recovered. So they might have called a medical person. They pulled the arrow out and gave him some medicine, nursed him back. He didn't die. Of course, the curse was already done. He says, you will be, the Muni cursed him and said, you will be born as a Vyadha in a family of Shudras. But fortunately, the Muni didn't die. Etat, this, te, now our context is back to the butcher shop. Meanwhile, back in the butcher shop, the Vyadha says, te, unto you, O Brahmana, unto you, etat this, etat sarvam, all of this, akyatam, all of this has been told to you, yatha mama pura abhavat, yatha, just as, mama, for me, to me, abhavat, the way it happened, pura, long ago. All of this has been told to you, O Brahmana, exactly as it happened long ago. And now we'll see the Brahmana's response. Very interesting. Brahmana uvacha, Brahmana sampratam chamato mesi, sampratam chamato brahmano natra samshayaha, brahmano natra yastu shudroda me satye, yastu shudroda dharme cha satato titaha, dharme cha. There's a third line. Tam brahmana maham manye, tam brahmana. vrittena hi bhaved dvajaha, vrittena hi. Now remember, the Brahmana asked, due to what karma were you born as a Shudra? And the Brahmana asked this because he could hardly believe his ears to hear this very profound spiritual discourse coming from a butcher. He's having a hard time fitting that together in his head. Now, having heard the story about how the butcher was a wise Brahmana and pious Brahmana in his past life, now the Brahmana says, aha, sampratam, now mataha me. Now, in English you'd say, now I get it. Sampratam, now mataha me, it is understood for me. Now I get it. And what has he now understood? Asi, you are Brahmana. You are a Brahmana. Na atra samshayaha, without doubt. You are a Brahmana. In spite of the fact that he's born to a Shudra family, in spite of the fact that he's chopping up animal carcasses all day long, the Brahmana says, I get it now. You really are a Brahmana. Yaha tu, but yaha tu Shudra, but you are also a Shudra. You are indeed a Brahmana, but you are also a Shudra. Because he knows he was born to a Shudra family. He's living the life of a butcher. He says, you are a Shudra, but not an ordinary Shudra. You are satata uttitaha, last word. You are all satata, always uttitaha, always engaged. Always engaged in what? Dhamma. In Dhamma, self-control. Satya, in Satya, truth, and in Dharma, in Dharma, righteousness. He says, I get it. You are a Brahmana, yet, let me paraphrase, you are a Brahmana in spite of the fact that you were born in a Shudra family. Why? If you're born in a Shudra family, you should be a Shudra, except he's a Shudra who is satata uttataha, always engaged in Dhamma, in Satya, and in Dharma, in self-control, in truth, and in righteousness. That's not the ordinary behavior of a Shudra. And here we come to the final point, which is brought out nicely at the end of this. We've had this discussion several times when we've studied the Bhagavad Gita. And that is, according to a scriptural standpoint, according to the standpoint that we find in the Bhagavad Gita, and in the Vyadha Gita, which means, according to the standpoint of the Mahabharata, what determines your caste? Now, we've had this discussion before, and we've observed that in modern times, we instantly think of caste in terms of birth. You're born into a certain family. And according to the family in which you were born, to which you're born, that determines your caste. But remember when we studied Bhagavad Gita? Chatur varnyam maya srishtam gunakarma vibhagashaha. Sound a little familiar in chapter 4? Where Sri Krishna says, Chatur varanyam maya srishtva. He says, maya, by me, Chatur varanyam, the four castes, were srishtva. They were created by me. Sri Krishna says, blame me. Not blame me. He says, I created the four castes. Now you might be thinking, why in the world did he do that? Why did Ishvara create a world in which there are caste distinctions which, as we understand, have led to such misery for so many millions and millions of people. How could that be? Well, Sri Krishna makes it very clear that these 4 castes were created by me, guna, karma, vibhagashaha. Vibhaga, according to division. Bhaga shaha, that shaha is an adverbial ending. Vibhaga shaha, according to the divisions of guna, qualities, and karma, actions, behavior, according to people's qualities and behaviors, I created the 4 castes. What is he saying? It's significant what he is not saying. He is not saying, I created the 4 castes according to birth family. He didn't say. He said, I created the 4 castes which are divided not by birth family, but divided according to guna, qualities, and karma, behavior. So from a scriptural standpoint, and we've had this discussion, we'll just briefly recall it, a brahmana is not one born in a brahmana family. A brahmana is one who has qualities and behaviors of a brahmana. A kshatriya is not one born to a kshatriya family. A vaishya or shudra is not one born to a vaishya or shudra family, but rather a shudra is one who has the qualities and behavior of a shudra. That's what Sri Krishna taught in chapter 4, and that's what's being taught here in our Vyadha Gita. He concludes, Tam Brahmana Maham Manye. The Brahmana, talking to the butcher, says, Aham Manye, I consider Tam Brahmanam, I consider you to be a Brahmana. Why does he consider him to be a Brahmana? Vrittena hi bhavet dvajaha. Vrittena, by your behavior, bhavet dvajaha, you are a twice born, you are a Brahmana based on your behavior. He's born into a Shudra family, but he says, I consider you a Brahmana. Why? Due to your vritta, due to your behavior. So, just a final, this could be the subject for another hour-long discussion about how unfortunate it is that this teaching was willfully neglected. And I do mean willfully neglected. This teaching that says the caste your caste is determined not by your birth, your caste is determined by your behavior and by your qualities. This teaching, which is blatantly present in the Bhagavad Gita, present in the Vyadha Gita, and present elsewhere in our scriptures, this scriptural teaching was willfully neglected, ignored, not neglected, willfully ignored by those who wanted to subvert the caste system for their personal agendas. It happened. There were priests who were not pious. There were priests who were very selfish and focused on their own agendas, who deliberately misinterpreted the caste system to be by birth, so that they would preserve their status, so that they would repress others. This is a tremendous social injustice, but let's be very clear, it's a social injustice. It's not a scriptural injustice. You see the distinction? The problems of the caste system are a fact, but those problems are not due to the scripture. The scripture is very clear. you are a Brahmana by your behavior and qualities, you are a Shudra by your behavior and qualities, then how did this terrible social injustice take place? Due to people. So, scriptures are not at fault, but rather selfish, mean-spirited people were at fault, and sadly, there are always such people in the world. But anyway, just the concluding point is, the terrible problems of casteism cannot be blamed on our scriptures. Most certainly those terrible abuses took place, but were not due to scripture, it was due to people. Okay, we'll conclude here. When we meet next time, we're going to get his final Upadesha, the Vyadha's final teachings. And the final teachings have to do with how did he cope with being stuck as a butcher. So he knows he's a Brahmana from his prior life. He's enlightened, but he doesn't say how he got enlightened, but we'll talk about how he might have gotten enlightened. So then how does he cope with his life as a butcher? How does he have such a good attitude towards his life? We'll see that, and he explains very nicely in the final part of this chapter. We'll finish off the chapter then in the next class. Some closing announcements. Sunday, tomorrow, we have our Gita at Work study group at 11 o'clock. You're welcome to come. At 6:15, I will conduct a satsang, question-answer session tomorrow. And also remind you, tomorrow at 5 p.m. is a dance performance on Mira, which is done as a benefit for the Aim for Seva program. You'll find flyers in the lobby and on the counter here for details on that. I'll also remind you that, in fact, I'm really excited that we're starting our new fall classes. Our Tuesday Vedanta class will be studying another section of Panchadashi. Last year we studied chapter 7. This year we're going to study chapters 2, 3, and 4, and just really powerful Vedantic teachings. Also, because they occur early in a text, you'll be able to, even if you haven't been attending those Tuesday classes, you'll be able to pick up the thread because they're early in the text. So please come and join us Tuesday evening, 7:30, for the Vedanta class on Panchadashi. On Wednesday, our intermediate Sanskrit class is resuming. On Thursday, our Bhagavad Gita Bhashya class is resuming. For the Gita Bhashya, you really need to know Sanskrit in order to follow that class. And, I have a question for you. Just last week when we celebrated Ganesh Chaturthi, you might remember I spoke about how chanting, especially Vedic chanting, is a very powerful form of prayer. Now, as an ashram where we're primarily focused on the teachings of Vedanta, so we haven't had much emphasis on devotional activities. When we do some simple puja here, but not a lot of focus. There's one program I don't know whether or not it would be suitable here or not, but instead of making a conclusion, I want to ask you. There is a very important, powerful Vedic hymn called Rudram. It's to Lord Shiva. And we often chant just a portion of it here, and maybe we do chant it here occasionally. To chant it properly and regularly is considered a very powerful practice. It's also a little difficult to chant. It has to be learned properly. We can, if there is some interest, we could start a program, I'm thinking maybe on Monday evenings, a program in which we learn how to chant Rudram, and perhaps we can end with Shiva Puja Monday. So if a number of you are interested, we could consider this program. I'm not saying we'll do it, but if a number of you are interested, what we would do is meet on Monday evenings. By the way, keep in mind your schedules, and you may be attending class on Tuesday, etc. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands in a moment, but don't overcommit yourself. So I'd like to know, though, if you would be interested, if we were to meet on Monday evenings at 7:30 and maybe do learning properly how to chant Rudram for about 40 minutes and then ending with Shiva Puja about 15 minutes. So about a 1 hour program. We would meet every Monday evening. How many people would be interested in doing that? Hold your hands up just for a minute. 5, 10, 15, 20. Okay, thank you. There's a significant interest. So I won't... Let me think about it. I'll make an announcement in the future on that program. That's very nice to see how many of you are interested. Okay, library will be open after class, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavit Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.